In previous videos, we've looked at how economic growth is one of the goals that an economy can have. So most economies want to have positive economic growth. And we talked in previous videos how we can measure the size of the economy, measure GDP, in terms of the expenditure approach and the income approach. What we're going to look at today is measuring economic growth. How do we measure it? And since economic growth is the change in an economy's real GDP per capita, we want to better understand the real part. What does that mean? So GDP we know is gross domestic product, the total value of all final goods and services produced in an economy in a year. Okay, so total value of everything we make. And we want to look at it per capita, per person in the population. So I want to see the amount that's being produced per person. I want to look at it in terms of real terms. So real as in we take out inflation. So we're going to be looking at in the next couple of videos, what is inflation? How do we measure it? How do we take it out? Well, for the most part, you can see that over time we have economic growth. You can see on the graph that the line tends to go up. So over the long term, we have positive economic growth. We're producing more goods per person. And you can see the real GDP per capita in Canada in 2018 was about 55,563 Canadian dollars. We can also look at this in terms of the US and Canada. And what we tend to see is that when the US experiences economic growth, Canada does as well. There's so much trade between our two countries that we tend to grow together and we tend to shrink together. So when our economy goes through a recession, so are they. And in fact, if we go back to that previous graph, you can see these little dips here. These dips in that long-term trend are those recessionary periods. So by definition, we are in a recession if we have decreasing real GDP for 6 months, 2 quarters. You're in a depression if you have decreasing real GDP for 2 years. So what we see here in 2008, that was a recession, and we had a recession as well in the 80s and early 90s. So we want to know if our economy is growing or shrinking. Are we in a recession? Are we in a depression? Or are we producing more goods and services per person? All right, so let's dive into looking at that economic growth by looking at first, why do we look at it in terms of real GDP per capita? So we said real GDP is the total value of all final goods and services produced in an economy in a year. And we divide it by the number of people in the economy. Because what if your population is growing faster than the amount of goods and services that you produce? If your population is growing faster than the amount of stuff, your people aren't really better off. Your economy isn't really expanding in terms of people's access to goods and services and the better life that goes with that. People's income isn't going up. So we need to have more goods and services per person for the economy to really, truly be growing. When we look at it in terms of real GDP per capita, and the reason we look at it in terms of real GDP per capita is what if all that's changed is the value of what you make? So all we have is prices have gone up. We're not actually making any more goods. It's just that our nominal GDP, the total value of what we're making, has changed. Well, we're not really doing any better as a society if everything is just more expensive. So we want to look at real GDP per capita when we measure economic growth. So let's talk about how we measure GDP. Well, we talked before how you can measure gross domestic product in in income approach and the expenditure approach. So this looks at how you add up that total value of goods and services. You can look at it in terms of what people get paid to make those goods and services, or you can look at it in terms of what we sell the goods and services for. income approach or expenditure approach. What we're looking at now is when we look at that total value of goods and services, are we including inflation or not? So we'll look at it in terms of nominal or real GDP. Nominal GDP is the value of all the goods and services in current prices. Real GDP is the value of what you make in a previous year's prices. So you set a base year, some previous point in time, for which you're going to look at the value of goods and services that are made. This way you can compare the amount of goods and services you're making over time. Because think about it, it's really hard to add a pencil and a laptop and a truck and a yacht, right? We can't just add all those together and say we made 15 goods. So we look at the value of what we make in terms of dollars. But if we look at it in terms of this year's prices and next year's prices, we can't tell if the change is because things got expensive or because we made more pencils and yachts and trucks. So we look at real GDP, the value of what we produce, but we look at it in a previous year's prices so we can compare multiple years. So let's look at an example of how this works. Suppose that our economy makes two goods. We make pizzas and we make calzones. So we could find nominal GDP, the total value of everything we make, and we're doing it in nominal GDP, then we're looking at it in that current year's prices. So nominal GDP in 2008 would be found by looking at the quantity of pizza in 2008 times the price of that pizza in 2008. We would then add to that the quantity of calzones in 2008 times the price of the calzones in 2008. So the nominal GDP in 2008 is $175. Now what about the nominal GDP in 2018? So let's look at nominal GDP in 2018. Nominal GDP, remember, is the value of the goods in that year's prices. So nominal GDP in 2018 would be the 20 pizzas that were sold times the $12 they were sold for, plus the 30 calzones times the $6 a piece they were sold for. And when we do that calculation, we find that nominal GDP is $420. So between 2008 and 2018, this hypothetical economy sees nominal GDP change from 175 to 420. But the question is that because prices went up? Or is that because we're making and selling more goods? Or perhaps it's a combination of the two. In which case, which is having a bigger impact? The change in price or the change in quantity? Well, if we want to figure that out, we need to find real GDP. So if we find real GDP for 2018, we need to choose the base year. And if the base year is 2008, then we're going to use 2008 prices and 2018 quantities. So the real GDP for 2018 is 20 pizzas using the 2008 prices of $10 a pizza, plus our 30 calzones times the $5 that a calzone cost in 2008. When we do that calculation, 20 times 10 and 30 times 5, we get 350. So the total value of everything we made in 2018 was $350 if we took out the inflation that we've experienced in the last 10 years, from 2008 to 2018. So what this shows us is that we can find the change due to price, and we can find the change due to quantity. Now you can see I've written a little triangle there, and this is a mathematical symbol called delta, and it just means change. So we can look at the change in nominal GDP from 175 to 420. How much of that was due to price? How much of that was due to quantity? Well, to figure this out, we take a look at those three calculations we've just done. So the nominal GDP in 2008 used prices from 2008 and quantities from 2008. The real GDP for 2018 used quantities from 2018 and prices from 2008. So when we look at that 350 versus the 175, the only difference in those two formulas is quantity. The prices are the same, which means we can take 350 minus 175, and that's going to tell us how much that nominal GDP change from 2008 to 2018 was because of making more pizzas and calzones. So 350 minus 175 is 175. Now, let's look at the formula that's nominal GDP in 2018. The nominal GDP in 2018 used quantities from 2018 and prices from 2018. In comparison, the real GDP for 2018 used quantities from 2018, but prices from 2008, which means the difference between the two formulas, this one here that is nominal GDP in 2018, and this one here that's real GDP for 2018, the difference in those two formulas is just the price. So we can take 420 and subtract 350, and when we do that, we get 70. So that's the difference due to price. Okay, so what does this tell us? In 2008, the size of our economy in 2008 dollars was $175 worth of stuff. In 2018, the total value of all the goods we made in 2018 dollars was $420. The reason that nominal GDP increased in that 10 years, $70 of that change was due to price. Pizzas cost more, calzones cost more. $175 of that difference was because we were making and selling more pizza and more calzones. So you can see how we might want to look at real GDP instead of nominal GDP to get at whether or not we're producing more goods, because nominal GDP, that change that we see from year to year, could be price or it could be quantity.